Hey Arnold is one of my favorite shows of all time. I've always admired how it tackled an array of topics, from more childish things like getting stuck on a roller coaster or a football grudge match against the 5th graders, to depictions of more serious issues such as alcoholism, addiction, and neglect. Hey Arnold created my favorite holiday special, which tells a touching story about a reunited father and daughter and the aftermath of the Vietnam War. There's a lot of interesting production details to talk about, so even if you've heard about this episode before, hopefully you'll learn some new stuff here, like how the writers made sure they never specifically said Vietnam in the episode, or how Mr. Win's voice actor was in Vietnam in the 1970s and actually contributed to the story of this episode. So the Christmas special starts with the boarding house doing a Secret Santa. Arnold gets Mr. Win, a neighbor he doesn't know much about. Arnold tries to get to know him further and finds out that Mr. Win used to live in a warring country, and during an evacuation where there was room for one more person, he gave his baby daughter to a US soldier in order to give her a safe life. As the helicopter was leaving, the soldier shouted the name of a city, that city being where Arnold and Mr. Win live now. Despite moving here, Mr. Win has never been able to find his daughter. While they don't explicitly mention the country's name, it's pretty clear Mr. Win is referencing the events of the Vietnam War, more specifically, the end of the Vietnam War, the Fall of Saigon. To quickly summarize the Fall of Saigon, in 1975, North Vietnam captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. This event marked the end of the Vietnam War, with the US withdrawing troops and support for months at this point. The US began to evacuate as many US citizens and refugees as they could. The destruction of runways led helicopter evacuation to be one of the only remaining options, with South Vietnamese citizens desperately gathered around the US Embassy, hoping to be saved from the impending North Vietnamese forces. Families sold their houses and all their belongings at fractions of their prices to escape on private planes or ships, many of which were false guarantees, leaving people stranded with nothing. The aerial evacuation of South Vietnam is the largest helicopter evacuation in history. One of the bigger reasons why I wanted to share my thoughts on this episode, despite how much coverage it gets, is because I wanted to go a little further into the history behind the episode and why it means so much to me. This is one of the only times I saw depictions of the Vietnam War as a kid. I can't recall learning much about it in school, and even other people I've talked to about this have said they learned a lot about World War II, but never about the Vietnam War in school. Animation inspires me to learn more about the topics and cultures I see. I think it makes me appreciate what I'm learning more when I tie it to something I enjoy, like, hey, that's the culture of the character I like. Even if it might sound a bit insane to say I spent my free time researching the Vietnam War because of an episode of Hey Arnold. We can tell stories that have universal qualities like love and empathy, while covering darker topics like war, while steering just clear enough that it can be on air. In an interview with NBC Asian America, Hey Arnold's creator, Craig Bartlett, says, "You'll notice he says, there was a war in my country, and so we don't even say Vietnam War." I've already mentioned how Hey Arnold didn't stray away from serious topics, and a lot of that comes down to trusting the audience. They trusted the audience could handle a mature story about war, refugees, and separated family. Funnily enough, Nickelodeon seemed to be more concerned that the episode wouldn't go over well, not because of the controversial nature of Vietnam, but that kids would find it boring. Joe Insolabahir, a writer and co-producer who went on to co-create Recess and Lloyd in Space, two shows I love dearly, shares this story regarding a Nickelodeon executive who had the final say whether the Christmas episode could be finalized or not. She popped it in, and her son, who was like 9, was sitting there and watched it. And it got to the end of the Vietnam thing, where he's holding the baby up and the helicopter guy takes the baby and everything, and the little boy turned to his mom and said, "Mom, was that what Vietnam was all about?" While that might sound like an r/that happened story where everyone claps at the end, I think this is a really important and interesting component to the production of this episode, and how close it was to never airing. It's also a testament to how the show conveys such meaningful topics in ways that can appeal to all audiences. With this newfound information about Mr. Win's backstory, Arnold and Gerald try to find Mr. Win's daughter through government records. They talk with the city's archivist, who gives them his Christmas shopping list, with the deal that he'll look for this girl if they get all his family's shopping he needs, and they get everything on the list except a pair of Nancy Spumoni snow boots. It's pretty funny how they build up the scale and importance of the boots, with staff crying with laughter every time they ask, so they go all around town in this jazz-filled montage with no luck. They show up that night with everything on the list except the boots, and the government guide just says, "No boots, no deal," and goes home. Now if this happened to me, I would have been like, "This one's on the..." But miraculously, Helga, who's been watching Arnold throughout the episode, decides to give away her Nancy Spumoni snow boots, which were so hard to find, her mom waited in line for 18 hours to get them. She gives them to the archivist, telling him how the football-headed boy won't believe in miracles anymore if they don't help him here. On Christmas morning, everyone exchanges their Secret Santa gifts, but Arnold doesn't have anything to give Mr. Wynn, since he spent the last day trying to get him in contact with his daughter, unsuccessfully. That is until moments later, Mai walks through the door and reunites with her father.
Father?
Mai? I can't believe it. Mai, is it really you?
In the end, no one knows how Mai got here, and they chalk it up to a miracle. And while it is a miracle, we see that it wasn't a Christmas angel responsible for this, but Helga, who's lovingly standing outside Arnold's house. It's sweet, I swear. This episode always brings a tear to my eye, and while this episode was really meaningful to Asian Americans who had very little representation of their culture in the mainstream media of the 90s, an unlikely hero who played an integral role in this episode was Mr. Wynn's voice actor, Bao Coleman. Craig Bartlett recalls bringing this story to Bao, and he said he was actually there during the events of Vietnam. Bartlett goes on to say how this was a really inspiring moment, furthering his conviction to create this episode, but Coleman also provided insight and accuracy to the depictions of Vietnam from his first-hand experience. I've also read countless praise of the genuine voice acting and accent of Mr. Wynn, which really amplified the sincerity of his character and story to many people. There's so many aspects like that I often take for granted, so it's always interesting to see things like an accent meaning a lot to people. Bao Wynn, a Vietnamese-American director, shares his thoughts with NBC Asian America. Even more compelling was that Mr. Wynn had the agency to tell his own story, Wynn said. To do so in an authentic accent spoke to a strength that the refugee and many others like him have. There's a softness and tenderness in someone speaking about their trauma in a language that isn't their native language. There's courage in that. Arguably the biggest feat of this episode is that Wynn, along with others, cite the Hey Arnold Christmas special as one of the first times they've seen a story about the Vietnam War centered around the Vietnamese perspective, as opposed to a loss of American innocence. Nancy Wong Yuen, a sociologist and author of Real Inequality, Hollywood's Actors and Racism, says, "For years, the standard for Vietnam War depictions was Stanley Kubrick's 1987 film, Full Metal Jacket, which did little to show the Vietnamese experience, aside from fetishize its woman. I think it's interesting to note, this episode might not have been produced without a voice actor that shared the culture with their animated counterpart. As you may know, some shows are ensuring voice actors accurately represent their characters' ethnicities and cultures, which made most notable headlines in the change of voice acting and eventual removal of Apu from The Simpsons. And while the controversy of Apu has been pretty heavily debated on the internet for a few years, I've read more recent stories of voice actors who feel they've been put into a box of only being able to audition for non-white characters, which ironically has created more limits and restraints for non-white voice actors. Regardless of your stance on this topic, I just wanted to share Coleman's impact on this episode as an example of a voice actor making a significant contribution to a story because of their shared background and experience. Last thing I want to quickly mention is this episode was written in part by the late Steve Vixton, who is responsible for many of Hey Arnold's more dramatic and serious episodes, which are generally my favorite episodes of the series. He also voiced Oscar Kakashka, which, fun fact, was kind of an impression of Gabor Chupo, the Hungarian co-founder of Klasky Chupo Studios, which produced Rugrats, As Told by Ginger, and Rocket Power, and several staff members had worked on Rugrats before moving on to Hey Arnold. Steve himself is of Czech origin, and Oscar was actually born in Czechoslovakia. This doesn't have much to do with the episode, but I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge a great writer that's no longer with us, who also happens to be my favorite voice on the show.
Kitty, kitty, kitty. Do you want to pet the kitty? Yes, I want to pet the kitty. Pet, pet, pet. Look, everybody, I'm petting the kitty.
So the Hey Arnold Christmas special had a really interesting production, from nearly getting cancelled multiple times, to an executive's son understanding the importance behind the episode, to a voice actor who experienced the depicted events of the Vietnam War and contributed to the story. It perfectly encapsulates Hey Arnold and the importance of empathy, and the special feels like a great example of the importance of animation. From representing different groups of people who often aren't portrayed in positive or even neutral light, to gracefully showing people events of the world that would be difficult to convey otherwise. I owe Hey Arnold a lot of credit for my love and inspiration for animation, and I definitely want to talk about some other episodes that mean a lot to me more in the future, but I'll leave that for another week. Thanks for watching, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.